This is Legislature's The Inside Story. Thank you for listening. I'm the host, Tim Story, the CEO of NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures. My guest is Leonore Ehling, the Executive Director of the Center for California Studies at Sacramento State University. Leonore's responsibilities include overseeing the Capital Fellows Program that places dozens of fellows in positions in all three branches of California state government. She also serves as the co-director of the Legislative Staff Management Institute, LSMI, which is a flagship program that NCSL does jointly with Sacramento State and the University of Southern California. It has developed hundreds of legislative staffers and given them the opportunity to enhance their management and leadership skills in a high-level executive education program. Ehling shares the director role with Paul Danchik of the University of Southern California, who was my guest on the last episode. Ehling talked about how her 2 decades as a legislative staff person helped her understand the value of recruiting a diverse group of fellows, many of whom still work in the legislature today. In recruiting people for the program, she stresses how exciting the legislature can be and the value of improving the lives of your fellow citizens. She also talks about how LSMI, which she was a graduate of, presents a wonderful opportunity for legislative staffers to take the big step to becoming a leader in their legislature. Leonore Ehling, coming from California onto the podcast, thank you so much for making time to join me today and have a conversation about your time in and around legislatures and some of the work you've done in LSMI.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you again. I really do appreciate it. And we'll be talking about LSMI. This is the second podcast consecutively that this has been a topic of conversation on my friendly little podcast that I have. And we'll get into that a bit and more. But let me just start with, let's go into a little bit more detail about how you have come to this day in your professional career. You worked in the California legislature, in the assembly. How did that come to pass? And, what is your background that leads you to this day as the leader of the California Fellows Program and other things?
Sometimes I think it was just luck and accident, but thinking back, I always did have an interest in government and politics. First job in the legislature in the assembly, I was 29, 30, and I had had some jobs before then, but they were all sort of related to government. My first job in the legislature was for the Legislative Analyst Office in 1995. And I loved the work. I loved budget stuff. I had a budget background. I had studied public finance in my graduate program, and I loved numbers. I loved the back and forth with budget stuff. About a year and a half into that job, the leadership in the assembly flipped from Republican back to Democrat. So this is sort of a time of upheaval, political upheaval in California. Willie Brown had been the speaker for many years, and he was termed out, and this was also the time when term limits passed. And so there were a lot of openings, and I threw my hat into the ring, and I got a job with the Assembly Education Committee analyzing bills. I didn't know I was going to stay for 20 years, but I did, and I worked in the Assembly. That was my first job. I later got to work for the Assembly Budget Committee, back to budgets, which I studied economics, and I love numbers and have always loved numbers, but I definitely love, the policy statement that a budget makes. The biggest demonstration of an entity's values is their budget. That's really where a lot of things get done. So I love that. And then I went to work for the Senate for 10 years, mostly in the Senate Office of Research, which was just sort of a nonpartisan group that's unique to the Senate. And we did a lot of work on appointments and oversight. So the Senate confirms gubernatorial appointees, and we would do a lot of background research related to executive branch agencies and the extent to which they were implementing or not implementing, or how they're implementing legislation. So that was fun. And then I got to work for Rules Committee. And then this position came up, and I thought, oh, this is great. I've worked in the legislature for 20 years. I'd like to work in the executive branch or try something new. But I still get to work with my friends, and my former colleagues, and close to a place that I loved and spent most of my career, and helping recruit people. So the Fellows Program that we run helps recruit not just young people, but people who don't have experience in the public sector, in the legislative sector, executive branch, or judicial branch, but are interested in it. And people like me, I was not a fellow. I got to work in the building in more of a roundabout way, but I was always interested in government and policy.
This is a good thing to jump off on here is the fellows program itself. Because I don't know that a lot of states have certainly something as elaborate and as well developed as the California Fellows Program. So tell us about that.
It started as an assembly program, and it was run by the assembly, and then the Senate created its own program. It dates back to the 50s. It was a paid internship. Well, actually, I think at the beginning it was, a very minimal symbolic stipend that people received. And then there was an initiative in the 80s that cut the legislature's budget. And so the legislature decided they wanted to keep these programs, but they couldn't keep them on their budget. So they gave them to Sac State. And President Don Girth, who is the founder of the Center for California Studies and is really the reason why the Fellows Program is here at a Sac State and not at UC, it's because of him. And here they stayed. And we've really had to make sure that we're doing right by the legislature and meeting their goals in terms of recruiting people that will stay, but also who represent the state. That's the big charge that they give us is find us some folks who are interested in serving, but who also will be able to relate to our constituents who represent the state, who have a point of view that's important to have as we deliberate and make decisions on people that affect people's lives. We really try to make sure that we're recruiting first generation college graduates, people from transfer students, people from all races, ethnicities, all parts of the state, rural California, Democrats, Republicans, immigrants. We really look far and wide for people who have interesting experiences and who have a passion for serving. And a lot of those folks end up staying and working in the legislature.
How big is the fellows program?
64 people.
And that's an annual, is it on kind of a calendar where like they all come in at the same time? And
We have an application process. You have to have 2 letters of recommendation. You have to write some essays. You have to have a bachelor's degree. We have a very minimal GPA. We don't care what major you have. Really, it's about what can you say about your passion for public service, say and also demonstrate. So it's fine if you worked at Starbucks, but maybe you have some story in your upbringing that explains why you're interested in working in changing the laws. I've met people. I just recruited a young woman today who said, "Oh, I'm really interested in working on healthcare." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Oh, my family was on Medi-Cal for a long time, which is the California equivalent of, Medicaid. And, we had some problems because they required us to sign up again every year. And it was very complicated and we couldn't get an answer. And I'd like to work, as somebody who used to have to navigate the system on this." So, and that's the kind of person we're looking for. Someone who has a passion for making things better.
and the fellows are now assigned to all 3 branches of government?
Yes, and that's something that is an innovation after the programs came to Sac State, and that's something that the late Tim Hodson, who was my predecessor.
Who I knew Tim well. It was a terrific guy. It was a huge loss, huge loss.
He was a legend, yes, and he was. I mean, he really. He was his energy and passion for legislative work, but also all sorts of public service was just it was contagious.
He was, I think, key to the Legislative Staff Management Institute and that evolution, and he was involved in some of that as well, which we'll get to again in a second. But so, what do the fellows do in the legislature? Just to leaders' offices, or how do you decide where they get assigned?
They work. So this is a paid post-baccalaureate fellowship. You get paid as a Sac State employee. You get a salary, about a little over $3,000 a month, and benefits. You're also enrolled as a graduate student, so you also get to defer your student loans because you're a student. You work full-time as an employee of the legislature. You work as a legislative aide. And you get thrown in. We get a lot of support. A lot of the funding that we get from the legislature is for staff to support the fellows. We have a director of each program. Jamie Taylor is director of the Senate Fellows Program. He works on LSMI. He worked at the Senate desk for years and years, and he knows backwards and forwards about the Senate rules. He can tell you deadlines, what's the file notice deadline, everything, right? And he trains people on the rules so that they know how to get a bill through and what you're supposed to do and what you don't. He also brings in speakers that tell people the do's and don'ts of staffing a bill, connections with both programs have a brown bag every week with a member who in the assembly, they actually feed them. They give them food, which is really important when you're young and working 12 hours a day and have no time to get lunch.
And I do think other, people listening here from other states, most states have some intern programs, and some of them are more evolved or less evolved. You guys I assume you get a direct appropriation of some kind. And
Yes, we do. Yes.
are they all individual member aids, or do some of them go to the clerk's office or the research office? Do they kind of get distributed to other places?
And most of them go to member offices. I believe from time to time we will place fellows in committees. That sort of depends on the leadership, but for the most part, the vast majority go to work as legislative aides.
One, I love that you said you recruit them, right? You're trying to, I assume you get a lot of applications because you're advertising it somehow for people who are graduating or recently graduated. You mentioned when we had a little pre-conversation before that you try to pitch them on the legislature. So how does that pitch go?
I think that sort of a typical applicant is someone who's a political science major and maybe a student body president or, is interested in politics from the campaign side. I remember hearing about the fellows program when I was right about to graduate my bachelor's program, and I was so intimidated by the program that I didn't apply because I thought, "Oh, I'm an introvert. I can't get up and talk in front of people." I thought it was for people who ran for student government, and that was way out of my league. I thought I'm a behind the scenes person. I didn't see myself in that role. I didn't realize there are many types of people who work as staffers, and that really as a staffer, much of your job is to be behind the scenes, but that doesn't mean you're not getting a lot done. It's such a unique job. It's hard to explain to your friends and family, and that's what I loved about LSMI when I went through the program as a legislative staffer when I worked in the Senate. I loved it. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to explain my job to people, or explain, you try to, your parents, your relatives are like, "Why did you stay at work all night?" I thought, "Didn't you get your work done?" Like, "No, we were all there."
I should devote like a series of podcasts just on how do we tell our friends and family what we do when we work in the legislature ecosystem. If you've never been to a desert, like how do you really know what a desert's like? Vaguely there's something called a desert, and not that legislature are deserts. It's quite the opposite, but lush places to work. But yeah, we should all compare notes on what do you say when you're on in some random place and somebody says, well, "What do you do?"
But I think for your loved ones, especially, when you're missing birthdays during parts of the year, right? And, like, what, why, and well, it's deadline week or what have you, it's the legislative deadline or it's, sine die or, whatever. But it was just really something that I really enjoyed at LSMI was just meeting people from other states who understood the the environment, but also understood the why. The why is, well, first of all, it's exciting. It's exciting to be in a place where there are really important decisions being made, and you get to be a part of it and get to try to help provide information to the people who are making the decisions. The real why for me is trying to make things better for my friends and family and my neighbors and my fellow Californians. And I think there's a lot of people who feel that way, but may not see themselves as working for an elected official or they think they're not glamorous enough or, I don't look like someone from the West Wing or whatever. I don't fit the profile of somebody in Veep or, there's good and bad portrayals of elected officials, right? But here I am, someone who didn't think of myself as having the personality that would be a good fit for a legislative staff. And I sort of stumbled my way into this place that I loved, and I stayed for 20 years. And those are the folks who I want to recruit, is people who may not see themselves as, running for office, but love to help other people and are curious enough about how government works that they want to spend their life there.
Yeah, I think that's a real key. This love to help other people, right? You really have to have a service mentality to be good at legislative staffing at some level. I believe that it's because it really is. It's support and teamwork, and that's true for legislators as well. Not everybody is going to be the speaker forever and or the Senate president forever, and it's really far more about teamwork and people who are their goal is to help everybody else across lines. And this notion of exciting too, I think that is something that really captures people to legislatures. Um, I mean, I've been in most of the legislatures at some point. Sometimes during the interim, by the way, they're the opposite of exciting. They're it's very you could see tumbleweeds coming down the hallways in some states. When the interim is very quiet. So it's such a contrast, right, to the busy days of session, especially in those crazy days when various interests just randomly collide. The trucking interest has got their trucks everywhere and it's loud and crazy for whatever because there's some bill that just do with trucking. I don't know why I picked that out of thin air. And then maybe it's realtor day in the Capitol, so there's realtors from everywhere, and I'm drawn to just the somewhat randomness of it, but it's all these different groups colliding in and like, why are you guys here? Well, we're here for because we're in support of guns or against guns or whatever. And at the same day, it's state realtor day or it's county auditors day, and those people are going around, and you're like, oh wow, it's just such a collision of all these different groups and interests that makes it very exciting.
It's democracy, right? And you always have the kids, the school group, going through when there's something, a very loud protest and people get arrested, and it's sort of like, welcome to welcome to the state capitol, kids.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, and then there's Mr. B's fifth grade class is coming through, and they're just sort of part of this whole circus, but not circus in a bad way. But it's fascinating. Like, look at that ring, and look at this ring, and for whatever reason, on the same day, there'll be some huge bill up, and let's in the health committee, and then there's also a huge bill up in the commerce committee, and I don't know. I think that's really fun about the places.
Oh yeah, the hearings. I mean, even though, as staffers, we know that, most of the time, if you're presenting a bill, you know how the vote's going to go. Maybe not, though, in other states. But it's just always, interesting to watch. You never know what's going to happen. The tough bills, the headbanger bills, right, as we used to say, that are like usually addressing some really difficult problem. And it's hard to move the needle for political reasons and just practicality and homelessness, say. And I just love watching that stuff. I'm a policy wonk, right? How do we solve this?
Well, let's talk about LSMI for a minute. You are the co-director of LSMI with Paul Danchik, who was the last podcast, and tell us what LSMI means, like the letters mean. What?
Legislative Staff Management Institute. This is a leadership program for legislative staff. It's as far as I know NCSL runs many programs, and this is a week-long intensive program for you. And you get to meet people from other states that do the same thing you do. And you get to commiserate with them. You get to sort of learn how their job's different, how their state is different. There are so many flavors, right, of legislatures. It's fascinating. Some of the voter initiatives that other states have to grapple with are fascinating. You think that you have it bad, and then you hear about like some state where they're not allowed to appropriate money in this particular way or something, that sounds crazy, but, people find a way. And that's something that's, I think, true about legislative staff is they find a way to get the job done. And they are very dedicated and they will do whatever it takes. I remember one time I was a staffer for, and this is an example that I always give, I was a staffer for the Assembly Budget Committee. I won't say which year, but my boss, who was the chief consultant, gave me a picture it was sort of like a picture of a fund with arrows going in and out and other funds, and gave me this picture and said, "Can you draft some language along these lines?" And I did it, man. I did it, And of course, and he was like, "That's not what I meant." And I said, "Well, you gave me a picture, what do you expect?" But of course, none of us had any sleep or anything. And then, of course, that led to all sorts of inside jokes about, let's do an interpretive dance to. And in the end, he explained what he meant. I'm not sure I want people to think that we all write like legislation from pictures, but this was a draft that they were going to put in, right? That's not what ended up happening, but it was for a proposal, someone's proposal.
This for me is a bit of a quandary, by the way. Just take a quick tangent. That I feel like if we designed a system, if we had engineers design a system and not the the framers of the Constitution, who's sort of, we could trace our models back then and even before then, obviously with colonial legislatures. An engineer would not design the system to make policy, right? And the reason I say that is that these the way the deadlines come and the human element, people they're tired. A lot of times when sessions in, you haven't really eaten very well for months, especially in California, of course, is more of a full-time legislature. But, at the end or when the budget is due, people are stretched too thin. They're really stressed. We make them travel long distances, which it brings its own stress. Probably not exercising great because it's into session and everything gets pushed out of the way in terms of taking care of yourself. And then we're like, okay, now make these really, really important decisions. Is that how you would design this from a neuroscience, from a brain science perspective? I'm not sure we would do that, but this is the system we have, and it's got all kinds of checks and system components to make sure that we could correct problems and that. But yeah, I'm struck by your story.
Yeah, I'm sure every country, it works the same way. I mean, when you have all these high stakes involved with these big decisions, it's not going to be easy or methodical, or, it's going to be unpredictable and hard to manage. And you have to have a deadline or they wouldn't get done.
And these are also people institutions. These are, at the end of the day, people who almost all are trying to do their best, but we all have quirky personality things going on. And then you throw everybody together and say, okay, we need you to be friends with these people and make huge decisions.
And the life of a legislature is hard. I didn't really appreciate that until I started working for them and thinking about how they're living in two different places and they have to leave their families and they may be caregivers and they have to kind of outsource that for a little while or bring their kids up and they're just never off. That's hard.
And people are saying really awful, hateful things about you, maybe. And would you tell your best friend if they said, "I'm thinking about running for the legislature"? Would you say, "Go for it," or would you say, "Be really careful and think about the commitment and the sacrifice"?
I don't know. I mean, today things are a little bit different. People can find your address and things are a lot more heated. I think I would have some ambivalence, but I think I might tell them to try to get a job as a legislative staffer instead. No. I mean, I think that democracy needs leaders just like the legislature needs legislative staff and new people coming in and the more representative we are, the stronger we are as a democracy, right? So particularly people who may not see themselves as elected officials, I think that's important.
I mean, in all fairness, I guess it dawns on me I should answer this question as well. And it has crossed my mind that the life of a legislator is definitely, there are really positive aspects to it, especially into session when you've really accomplished something. And it is a sacrifice. It's a marathon. By the way, having run marathons in my much younger and skinnier days, I know that at the end, it's incredible, but you also have a lot of pain, right? You hurt for a couple of days. I guess that metaphor plays through because you finish session and you're tired. It hurts. You've left it on the field or on the race course, but you've done something incredible. If you've really taken the job seriously. But there is a toll. There is a price to pay, especially for families. I guess if I were giving advice to somebody run for legislature, I'd say do it with your eyes wide open. Talk about the sacrifices, because there is definitely sacrifice to it, offset by some incredible rewards. And then the other part that you brought up, Leonore, is that we truly need good people, and it would worry me if the smartest people or the most thoughtful and people that could really bring different voices to it all said, no, it's not worth the price. Speaking of worth the price, in most places the salary does not really play. Even in places that pay more, California, New York, it's still a lot of people have to take substantial pay cuts from their personal income to make it work. And then there's the time is just incredible.
Appealing to people's interest in doing good for other people is, almost every member I've worked for has had that motivation. It's a big risk too, because you may lose your election and you get elected and you may lose a big fight, a huge fight on a bill, a thing you're very passionate about.
Well, if you can't get over losing, frankly, if you can't adjust to you're not winning every time, it may not be the right business for you. Because I think a big part of being a successful legislator is take your losses, take your wins, and then come back again another time, come back the next year, run whatever, or decide it's time for somebody new to come into this game. But you said it. It's so true that it's almost every legislator I've ever met, which has got to be thousands at this point, they really do seem to have that in common. Like, you got to sort of want to help people, or bring your vision to the state. Very few of them are like, wow, I want the perks.
I want the Southwest flights back and forth every week.
I want that title. I want people to call me senator and assembly member. But yeah, that wears off after about 12 hours. And then you're like, oh, great. Back to LSMI. What do you love about the program? You've done it how many times, roughly?
I have been involved in running the program. This will be my fifth year. And I've been a participant as a legislative staffer. And that's when I got to meet Tim. Just really, this is how dedicated he was to legislatures, is on the bus ride from Sacramento to San Francisco. Because back then in the early noughts, or the 2009 when I went through, we also had a trip to San Francisco. So we got on the bus and he showed us a video of a television program, I think from the 50s or 60s, about a state legislature, a fictional state legislature. It was like some kind of drama. It was like Perry Mason or something. It was like this gem, and he wanted to share it with all of us. So his enthusiasm for this work was just infectious. It's an intense 8-day program. You will be in a room with other staff, and you'll be hearing from people who inspire other people on particular aspects of leadership, how to deal with difficult people, how to negotiate, how to take care of yourself. You get like a Strengths Finders like assessment of your own strengths and your skills. And that is something that was very eye-opening to me. Legislatures are really good at doing things for the staff that are urgent. The kind of non-urgent but important things like training and things like that, sometimes because of deadlines and just how legislators are set up, those don't always go to the top of the pile. So this is an opportunity for your institution to invest in you as a legislative staffer and give you some tools that you need to take your career to the next step and become a leader. Even if you're not a manager, a lot of places are flat organizations, can show leadership from the middle, do lots of things, right? You can be a recruiter to bring more people into the profession. You can change to another profession. Some people come through our program and they say, I think I want to do, IT or something instead of being a lawyer. But most of the time, it allows people to take their next step and maybe put their name in the hat for a leadership role, or just stay in what they're doing and just take it to the next level and be like the elder in their organization.
And when we have a lot of experience, we know that people have done that, who've come through this particular staff management program, very customized for the legislature. NCSL, I think you're right. This is often like very important, but not urgent. So as we know, that little grid of important and urgent. And so it sometimes doesn't get the attention it needs. And we have dramatically increased our professional development services for legislatures because they just keep demanding it. So I kind of feel like hopefully there's more attention and more awareness that it's really vital to invest. We also know it pays off. We see people go through this program who sometimes it's career changing, it's life changing. It's such a gift to take a week, which isn't very long in the grand scheme of things, and reflect on your role in your career and how you can do better. I also went through the LSMI program when it was at the University of Minnesota, and it was actually 2 weeks then, as you probably have heard, and we stayed in the dorm rooms at the university, which were astonishingly small in my recollection. I didn't know dorm rooms were that small, at least because my memory of college, you don't remember how small your room. You just thought, oh, I have my own room. I don't know. So that was a great time, and I know to this day I lean on some of the things I learned. Well, we're so excited to continue to partner with Sacramento State and, of course, USC and Paul Danchik, who we heard from last time on the podcast. I just want you to know that from the NCSL perspective, it's just a terrific partnership, and we hear over and over and over again how the reviews, the experiences are just so positive, and I know you make a huge contribution to that as the co-director.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, we couldn't have a better partner. NCSL is there to remind legislative staff every day that they matter and that they're worth investing in. And it's an excellent opportunity, I think, for NCSL offers so many opportunities for legislative staff to take leadership roles within NCSL and continue their development in terms of learning about other states and getting support. NCSL, when I was a staffer, even before LSMI, I relied on them for many things. It's really a pleasure to partner with you.
Well, that is sure nice to hear, and right back at you, Leonore. So a great place to say a huge debt of gratitude for all that you're doing in California and for LSMI and for the time you took to come and have this conversation.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I've been talking with Leonore Ehling, Executive Director of the Center for California Studies at Sacramento State University and the Co-Director of the Legislative Staff Management Institute. Thank you for joining me and Leonore on this episode of Legislatures, the Inside Story, brought to you by the National Conference of State Legislatures.
You can check out all the podcasts from the National Conference of State Legislatures by searching for NCSL Podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Tim Story, NCSL's CEO, hosts Legislatures, the Inside Story, where he focuses on leadership and legislatures. The Our American States podcast dives into some of the most challenging public policy issues facing legislators. On Across the Aisle, host Kelly Griffin tells stories of bipartisanship. Also check out our special series, Building Democracy, on the history of legislatures.